The Pennsylvania hills stood bare and gray under winter skies in late February of 1961. 2.5 years had passed since Catherine Ashford died in the summer of 1958, but the Morrison Ridge estate still mourned her absence. Bare branches clawed at the clouds. Dead leaves piled in drifts against the stone walls. The Victorian mansion sat atop the ridge like a monument to grief, its windows dark and watchful. And inside those walls, 15-year-old Lorelei Ashford stood at her bedroom window, watching her father's black Cadillac disappear down the long driveway. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, leaving a ghostly print that faded as quickly as her hope. The car carried Cornelius Ashford to yet another business meeting in Philadelphia, another excuse to flee the house that had become a prison. Lorelei turned from the window and caught her reflection in the mirror. 2.5 years ago, she had been a different girl, her mother's daughter. Hair brushed until it shone like copper wire. Eyes bright with the kind of innocence that comes from being truly loved. Now those same green eyes held shadows that no 15-year-old should carry. The bruise on her left cheek had faded to a sickly yellow. She touched it gently, remembering the crack of Vivian's palm 3 days earlier. The sound had echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Her father had been there. He had seen it happen. But Cornelius Ashford had simply folded his napkin, excused himself, and retreated to his study. That was when Lorelei understood. Her father was already gone, not physically, not yet. But the man who had once read her bedtime stories and taught her to identify birds by their songs had disappeared the day he married Vivian Blackwell. The door opened without warning. Lorelei's spine stiffened. Vivian stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light like some beautiful, terrible angel. At 40 years old, she possessed the kind of beauty that made men stupid and women envious. Raven black hair swept into an elegant chignon, lips painted the color of fresh blood, a cream silk blouse tucked into a pencil skirt that hugged curves designed to distract and deceive. "Your father has left," Vivian said. Her voice was smooth as honey laced with arsenic. "He won't be back until Friday." 3 days. Lorelei's heart dropped into her stomach. "I've prepared a list of chores." Vivian stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a death march. She placed a folded paper on the dresser. "You'll find it quite thorough. The entire second floor needs scrubbing. On your hands and knees, the way proper servants work." Lorelei kept her eyes down. Speaking only made things worse. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She raised her eyes, met that cold, calculating gaze. Vivian smiled. It was the smile of a shark circling wounded prey. "Your mother spoiled you, made you think you were special, made you think this house, this money, this life, that it all belonged to you." She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "But you're just a silly little girl who doesn't understand how the world works." "My mother loved me," Lorelei whispered. The words came out before she could stop them. The slap came faster than thought. Lorelei's head snapped to the side, her ear ringing, eyes watering. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "Your mother was weak," Vivian hissed. "And weakness is not something I tolerate in this house. Do you understand me?" Lorelei nodded, not trusting her voice. "Say it." "I understand." "Good." Vivian straightened, smoothing her skirt. The monster disappeared behind the mask again, her expression returning to one of cool indifference. "You have until tonight to finish those chores. If I find even a speck of dust, you'll sleep in the cellar. And trust me, child, you do not want to sleep in the cellar." She turned and left, closing the door with a soft click that was somehow worse than a slam. Lorelei waited until the footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she moved to her bed and sat down, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to still the tremors, but they only grew worse. This was her life now. This had been her life for 8 months, ever since the wedding in June of 1960. 8 months of walking on eggshells. 8 months of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. 8 months of watching her father choose his new wife over his own daughter, again and again and again. The worst part wasn't the violence. The worst part was the isolation. Vivian had been methodical in her cruelty. First, she had convinced Cornelius that Lorelei was becoming troubled, a rebellious teenager who needed discipline. When Lorelei's friends called, Vivian told them she wasn't available. When they stopped calling, Vivian smiled. School had been next. Vivian had persuaded Cornelius that Lorelei would be better served with a private tutor, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Weatherby, who came twice a week and taught from outdated textbooks, while Vivian listened from the hallway, ensuring no confidence was shared, no plea for help whispered. Now Lorelei had no one, no friends, no school, no escape. She unfolded the list of chores. The paper trembled in her hands. Scrubbed the hallway floors, polished the brass fixtures, cleaned the windows inside and out, washed the linens, ironed the curtains, dust every surface. It would take 12 hours at least, maybe more. And if she didn't finish, or if Vivian found fault with her work, the cellar. Lorelei had been down there only once, shortly after Vivian moved in. It was a damp, sprawling basement that smelled of earth and decay. The walls were stone, mortared together generations ago. The floor was packed dirt in some places, crumbling concrete in others. And beyond the main room, there were passages. Old coal tunnels from when the house had been heated by a furnace that burned anthracite hauled up from the mines below. Dark passages that led down into the earth, into places where screams would echo and die unheard. A knock at the door made Lorelei jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Miss Lorelei?" The voice was soft, careful. "It's me, child. Ida." Lorelei crossed the room and opened the door. The housekeeper stood in the hallway, her weathered face creased with concern. Ida was 58 years old and had worked for the Ashfords since before Lorelei was born. She had gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, kind brown eyes, and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of service. She had been there when Lorelei took her first steps. She had been there when Lorelei's mother died. And she was still there now, the last link to everything that had been good in this house. "I brought you something." Ida glanced down the hallway, then quickly pressed a napkin-wrapped bundle into Lorelei's hands. "Some bread and cheese. You didn't eat breakfast." "I wasn't hungry. You need your strength." Ida's eyes swept over Lorelei's face, lingering on the fading bruise. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. What was there to say? They both knew the truth. They both knew what Vivian was. "She gave me chores," Lorelei said quietly. "A lot of them." "I know. I saw the list." Ida reached out and gently touched Lorelei's cheek. "Listen to me, child. Do the work. Keep your head down. Don't give her any reason to—" She stopped herself, but the words hung in the air between them. "Don't give her any reason to hurt you more." "How much longer can this go on?" Lorelei whispered. "Someone has to see. Someone has to know." Ida's expression turned pained. "Your father, my father, sees what he wants to see." The bitterness in Lorelei's voice surprised even her. "He's a coward, Ida. He knows what she is, and he does nothing." "Hush now." Ida glanced nervously down the hallway again. "She has ears everywhere. You can't talk like that." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Lorelei felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She had learned not to cry. Tears only fed Vivian's cruelty. Just survive? For how long? Ida opened her mouth to respond, but footsteps on the stairs silenced her. Both women froze. The steps were slow, deliberate, coming closer. "You should go," Lorelei breathed. Ida nodded and hurried down the hallway toward the servants' stairs. Lorelei closed her door and leaned against it, heart pounding, clutching the napkin-wrapped food to her chest. The footsteps passed by her room without stopping. A door opened and closed somewhere down the hall. Lorelei waited, counting her heartbeats, until silence returned. She unwrapped the napkin, fresh bread still warm, a wedge of sharp cheddar, a small apple. Ida must have taken it from the kitchen when Vivian wasn't looking, risking punishment herself to bring comfort to a desperate girl. Lorelei ate standing by the window, watching clouds gather over the hills. A storm was coming. She could feel it in the air, that electric tension that preceded thunder. She thought about her mother. Catherine Ashford had died 2.5 years ago in the summer of 1958. Cancer had taken her slowly, stealing pieces until there was nothing left but a ghost in a nightgown, too weak to lift her head from the pillow. Lorelei had sat beside that bed every day, holding her mother's hand, watching life drain away like water through cupped fingers. Near the end, when morphine made her mother's words thick and dreamy, Catherine had gripped Lorelei's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something," she had whispered. "Anything, Mama. Be strong. Stronger than me. The world is cruel to women, baby girl, especially women who have something worth taking." Her eyes had focused then, cutting through the fog of pain and drugs. "Your father is a good man, but he's weak. When I'm gone, there will be vultures, people who see opportunity in grief. Promise me you'll be smart. Promise me you'll survive." Lorelei had promised. She had held her mother's hand and made a vow she hadn't understood then, but understood perfectly now. Catherine Ashford had known. Somehow, even in death's shadow, she had seen the future. Lorelei finished the bread and cheese and tucked the napkin into her pocket. Then she picked up the list of chores and got to work. The hours blurred together in a haze of soap water and aching muscles. She scrubbed the hallway floors on her hands and knees, the way Vivian demanded. She polished brass until her reflection gleamed back at her from doorknobs and picture frames. She washed windows inside and out, balancing on a stepladder while winter wind rattled the glass. The house was vast, full of rooms that hadn't been used in years. Her grandfather's study still smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Her grandmother's sewing room held a dress form that wore the shadow of a woman who had been dead for 20 years. Every surface collected dust. Every window caught light and held secrets. Lorelei worked through lunch, through afternoon, into evening. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the full weight of her trapped, desperate existence. It was almost 7 o'clock when she finally finished. She stood in the upstairs hallway, leaning against the wall, exhausted to her bones. The house gleamed around her, every surface spotless, every window crystal clear. "Well, well," Vivian's voice came from the shadows at the end of the hall. "Aren't you the industrious little mouse?" She emerged from the darkness like something conjured, still perfect, still beautiful, not a hair out of place. Vivian walked slowly down the hallway, running one finger along the windowsill. She examined it in the lamplight. "Acceptable," she said, sounding almost disappointed. Her eyes swept over Lorelei with cold appraisal. "You look exhausted. Perhaps you've learned something today about the value of hard work." Lorelei said nothing. She had learned long ago that every word was a potential trap. "Go to your room," Vivian said. "I'll have Ida bring you dinner. You've earned it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Lorelei? Your father called. He's extended his trip. He won't be home until Sunday now." 4 more days. Vivian smiled, reading the fear in Lorelei's eyes. "Sleep well, child. Tomorrow we'll tackle the 3rd floor." She glided away, her perfume lingering like a curse. Lorelei stumbled to her room and collapsed on the bed without bothering to change. Her body was a chorus of pain. Every muscle screamed, but worse than the physical exhaustion was the soul-deep weariness, the knowledge that tomorrow would be the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. This was her life now. This was her prison. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Ida was gently shaking her shoulder. "Miss Lorelei, come on, child, you need to eat something." Lorelei sat up, disoriented. Night had fallen. Her room was dark except for the lamp Ida had brought. On the nightstand sat a tray with soup and bread. "What time is it?" Lorelei's voice was rough. "Nearly 9. Eat before it gets cold." Lorelei picked up the spoon, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Ida took it from her gently and fed her like a child. The soup was warm and rich, and Lorelei felt tears slide down her cheeks as she swallowed. "It's going to be all right," Ida whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. "You just have to hold on. Be strong, like your mama wanted." "I don't know if I can," Lorelei admitted. "I don't know how much more I can take." Ida set down the spoon and took both of Lorelei's hands in hers. "Listen to me. I've been in this house for 30 years. I've seen things. I've learned things." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "That woman downstairs, she's not what she seems. I've been watching her. I've been keeping track." "What do you mean?" "I found papers in her room, hidden in her hat box, newspaper clippings from other cities, obituaries." Ida's grip tightened. She's been married before, twice before, and both times her husbands died young. Both times she inherited everything. Cold dread washed over Lorelei. "You think she—" "I don't think. I know." Ida pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket. "I found this, too. A letter from a pharmacy in Pittsburgh. She's been getting prescriptions filled. Arsenic compounds. She told the pharmacist they were for killing rats." The room seemed to tilt. Lorelei gripped the edge of the bed. "Papa? Is she poisoning Papa?" "I believe so. He's been sick, hasn't he? Tired all the time, losing weight." "The doctor said it was stress, but—" Ida's face was grim. "I've been watching her fix his drinks, his meals. She's very careful, very patient. But I've seen her slip things into his coffee when she thinks no one is looking. We have to tell someone. The police, a doctor, anyone." "Who would believe us? A housekeeper and a troubled teenage girl?" Ida shook her head. "She's too clever. She's thought of everything. Your father is completely under her spell. He wouldn't believe us if we told him the sky was blue." "Then what do? We gather evidence. We build a case. And we wait for the right moment." Ida squeezed Lorelei's hands. "But you have to be careful. If she suspects we know, if she thinks we're a threat—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lorelei felt something shift inside her. The helpless victim was still there, cowering in the corner of her heart. But something else was awakening, something harder, something that had been forged in the fires of suffering and tempered by fear. If Vivian was a monster, then Lorelei would have to become something stronger than a monster's prey. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Keep your head down. Don't provoke her. And if you see anything at all, come tell me immediately." Ida stood, picking up the tray. "I should go before she comes looking for me. Get some rest. You'll need your strength." After Ida left, Lorelei lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. Her mind raced through everything she had learned. Vivian was a killer, a black widow who seduced wealthy men and slowly poisoned them to death. And now she had her claws in Cornelius Ashford. How long had it been going on? When had Vivian first started poisoning him? Was it too late already? Lorelei thought of her father. She tried to remember the man he had been before Vivian. Strong, confident, a man who built a lumber empire from nothing and ruled it with a fair hand and a sharp mind. But that man had started disappearing the moment Catherine died. Grief had hollowed him out, left him vulnerable. And Vivian had known exactly when to strike. Lorelei rolled onto her side, pulling her knees to her chest. She thought of her mother's warning. Be strong. Be smarter. Survive. But how did you survive when you were trapped in a house with a killer? When every adult who should protect you either wouldn't or couldn't? When the very person who was supposed to be your father had become blind to the danger? Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was closer now. Rain began to patter against the windows, soft at first, then harder. Lorelei closed her eyes and tried to find sleep. Tomorrow would bring new horrors, new trials, but tonight, at least, she knew the truth. And truth, however terrible, was a weapon. She just had to figure out how to use it. The next 3 days passed in a nightmare of exhaustion and fear. Vivian kept Lorelei working from dawn until well past dark, cleaning, scrubbing, polishing. Tasks designed not just to punish but to break. And through it all, Vivian watched with those cold, calculating eyes, waiting for Lorelei to fail, to rebel, to give her an excuse. But Lorelei had learned. She kept her head down. She worked until her hands bled and her back felt like it would snap. She swallowed her pride and her rage and did exactly what was demanded. On the third night, Friday, February 24th, after Vivian had finally dismissed her, Lorelei made her way to her room on legs that barely supported her weight. She was so tired she could barely think. Her vision swam. Her body felt like it was made of lead. She pushed open her door and froze. Her room had been ransacked. Drawers hung open, contents spilled on the floor. Her mattress was askew, books scattered everywhere. Her mother's jewelry box lay overturned on the dresser, its contents gone. Lorelei's heart stopped. The jewelry box, her mother's journal, the one place she had hidden anything of value, any connection to the life she'd had before Vivian. She rushed to the dresser, frantically searching through the scattered items. Panic clawed at her throat. Where was it? Where was her mother's journal? Looking for something? Vivian stood in the doorway, holding a leather-bound book. Catherine's journal. The pages her mother had filled with memories, with love, with warnings. "That's mine," Lorelei breathed. "Nothing in this house is yours." Vivian flipped through the pages casually. What an interesting read. Your mother was quite the romantic. All these little notes about family secrets, hidden treasures. The old coal tunnels beneath the house. She looked up, eyes glittering. "Did you know about the tunnels, Lorelei? Did your precious mama tell you what's down there?" Lorelei's blood ran cold. The tunnels, the journal mentioned them. And something else. Something her mother had written in those final, fevered days. Something about the old coal shaft. About what Lorelei's grandfather had hidden there during the Depression. Gold. The Ashford fortune in gold bars, hidden away when banks were failing and the world was crumbling. A secret passed down through generations. A secret Vivian now knew. "I can see by your face that you do know." Vivian smiled, triumphant. Your mother was quite thorough. Maps, diagrams, exact locations. She closed the journal with a snap. How thoughtful of her to document everything so carefully. "Give it back." Lorelei took a step forward. "Or what?" Vivian's smile turned cruel. "What are you going to do, little mouse? Run to your father? He's in Philadelphia, remember? And even if he were here, he wouldn't believe you. He doesn't believe anything you say anymore." It was true. All of it. Lorelei felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had nothing, no weapon, no ally, no hope. "I've been patient with you," Vivian continued. "I've played the game, waited for your father to see you for the troubled, ungrateful child you really are. But I grow tired of this charade." She set the journal on the hallway table. "Tomorrow night, you and I are going to take a little trip down to those coal tunnels. I want to see exactly what your grandfather was hiding, and you're going to show me. And if I refuse? Then Ida will have an unfortunate accident. Falls are so common in old houses, aren't they? Especially on steep cellar stairs." Vivian's voice was silk over steel. "Do we understand each other?" Lorelei understood. She understood perfectly. Vivian would kill Ida without hesitation. Would probably kill Cornelius too, once she had the gold. Would kill anyone who stood between her and what she wanted. "We understand each other," Lorelei whispered. "Excellent." Vivian turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and don't bother trying to run. I've locked all the doors, the windows too. This house is sealed tight. There's nowhere to go, child, nowhere to hide. Your only choice is to cooperate." She left, taking the journal with her, leaving Lorelei standing in her destroyed room with nothing but fear and rage. Lorelei sank to the floor among the scattered remnants of her life. This was it. Tomorrow night, Vivian would force her down into those tunnels, And once they were down there, once Vivian had what she wanted, Lorelei would disappear. A tragic accident. A young girl lost in the old coal mines beneath the house. It would be so easy to explain, so believable. She pressed her hands against her face, feeling the sting of tears she refused to shed. She wanted to scream, to rage, to smash everything in reach. But that would only bring Vivian back, would only make things worse. Think. She had to think. There had to be a way out. Her mother had been smart, had left clues, had tried to prepare her for this. The journal, the maps, the tunnels. Wait. Lorelei's mind began to race. If there were tunnels, there had to be exits, multiple exits. Coal mines always had emergency shafts, ventilation passages. Her grandfather would have known that, would have planned for it. If she could get down there first, if she could explore, find another way out, then maybe, just maybe, she could escape, could get to the authorities, could expose Vivian before it was too late. It was a desperate plan, a foolish plan, but it was the only plan she had. Lorelei stood on shaking legs. She had until tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours to find a way into those tunnels, to find a way out of this nightmare. She went to her window and looked out at the dark hills. Rain still fell, drumming against the glass. Lightning flickered in the distance. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of Vivian's poison and cruelty, was freedom. All Lorelei had to do was survive long enough to reach it. The morning of Saturday, February 25th, dawned gray and cold. Lorelei woke before sunrise, her body stiff from sleeping on the floor among the ruins of her ransacked room. She had spent the night formulating a plan, fragile and desperate, but a plan nonetheless. She had to get to the coal tunnels before Vivian forced her down there tonight. Had to find the exits her grandfather would have built. Had to understand the labyrinth beneath the house before it became her tomb. The problem was Vivian. The woman seemed to have eyes everywhere, appearing in doorways when least expected, her footsteps silent as a ghost's, and now the house was locked tight. Every door, every window. Vivian had made sure of that. But there was one entrance Vivian might not know about, one way down that existed before the house was even built. The old coal chute. Lorelei remembered her grandfather mentioning it once, years ago when she was small. A shaft that ran from the outside of the house directly down to the coal cellar. They had sealed it decades ago when the house switched to oil heating, but the structure would still be there, hidden behind the overgrown hedges on the north side of the property. If she could find it, if she could open it, if she could climb down before Vivian noticed she was gone. Too many ifs. But what choice did she have? Lorelei dressed quickly in dark clothes, wool pants instead of a skirt, sturdy boots instead of slippers. She pulled her hair back and tucked a small flashlight into her pocket. It was an old one, the batteries probably weak, but it was all she had. The house was silent as she crept down the servants' stairs. Dawn light filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of gray. She could hear Ida moving around in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee drifted through the hallway. Lorelei paused outside the kitchen door, debating whether to tell Ida where she was going. But no, the less Ida knew, the safer she would be. If Vivian questioned her, Ida could honestly say she knew nothing. The back door was locked, as expected. But the key hung on a hook in the pantry, hidden behind a row of preserved peaches. Vivian wouldn't have thought to look there. Lorelei took it with trembling fingers and slipped it into the lock. The bolt slid back with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the quiet house. Lorelei held her breath, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the whisper of wind against the windows. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. The garden stretched before her, wild and overgrown. Her mother had once kept them beautiful, roses and lavender and chrysanthemums in neat beds bordered by white stones. But Catherine had been gone for 2.5 years, and the gardens had returned to chaos. Vines crawled over trellises. Weeds choked the flower beds. Dead leaves piled in drifts against the stone walls. Lorelei moved quickly along the side of the house, staying close to the walls where the shadows were deepest. The north side was the oldest part of the structure, built by her great-grandfather in the 1880s. The original coal cellar was somewhere here, beneath the kitchen wing. She pushed through a tangle of overgrown boxwood hedges, branches catching at her clothes and scratching her arms. Behind the hedge, almost invisible, under a blanket of dead ivy, she found what she was looking for. A metal grate set into the ground, rusted, ancient. The coal chute. Lorelei knelt beside it and pulled away the ivy with both hands. The metal was cold and rough with corrosion. The grate was held down by a simple latch, also rusted. She worked at it with shaking fingers, trying to be quiet, trying not to think about what she was about to do. The latch finally gave with a screech of protesting metal. Lorelei froze, heart hammering. Had anyone heard? She waited, counting seconds, watching the house for any sign of movement. Nothing, only silence and the whisper of wind through bare branches. She lifted the grate. It was heavier than expected, the hinges groaning as she pushed it back. Beneath was darkness. A shaft dropping straight down into the earth. She could smell it, damp stone and anthracite residue, and something else, something older. The smell of deep places where sunlight never reached. Lorelei clicked on her flashlight. The beam was weak and yellow, but it showed her enough. Metal rungs set into the shaft wall, a ladder leading down into blackness. She had climbed trees before, had scaled the rocks behind the house when she was younger, but this was different. This was descending into the unknown with nothing but a dying flashlight and desperate hope. Lorelei swung her legs over the edge. The first rung was slippery with moisture and rust. She tested her weight on it carefully. It held. She began to climb down. The shaft was narrow, the walls pressing close on either side. The metal rungs were spaced far enough apart that each step required stretching. Her flashlight beam bounced crazily with each movement, showing her glimpses of wet stone and dangling roots that had pushed through cracks in the masonry. Down, down, down into the earth. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of black powder intensified. Lorelei's breathing echoed in the confined space, and she tried to calm herself, tried to focus on each rung, each careful placement of hands and feet. She had descended perhaps 30 feet when her foot found solid ground instead of another rung. Lorelei stepped off the ladder and swept her flashlight around. She was in the old coal cellar. It was larger than she had expected, a room perhaps 20 feet square with a ceiling so low she could touch it if she stretched. The walls were rough stone, black with centuries of sooty residue. The floor was packed earth, uneven and treacherous. And there, on the far side of the room, was an opening. A passage leading deeper into darkness. The coal tunnels. Lorelei moved toward the passage, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The tunnel was narrow, just wide enough for a man to walk through hunched over. The ceiling was shored up with ancient timbers that looked ready to collapse at any moment. The walls were the raw earth and rock of the hillside, weeping moisture that dripped steadily onto the floor below. She stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed her. Her flashlight seemed pathetically inadequate against the absolute black of the underground. Every sound was amplified, the drip of water, the crunch of her footsteps, her own breathing harsh in her ears. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting through the earth like the burrow of some massive creature. Side passages branched off at irregular intervals, disappearing into darkness that her light couldn't penetrate. Lorelei tried to keep track of her turns, tried to build a mental map, but it was hopeless. Within minutes, she was completely disoriented. How far had she come? 20 yards? 50? It was impossible to tell in the dark. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger chamber. Lorelei stopped, sweeping her flashlight around. This was different. Not a natural cave or a mining passage. This was a room. Someone had carved it out deliberately, had reinforced the walls with stone and a mortar. In the center of the chamber sat a collection of wooden crates, old and rotting but still intact. Lorelei approached them carefully. The wood was stamped with dates: 1932, 1933, the Depression years, her grandfather's hiding place. This was where he had stored the family fortune when the banks failed and the world fell apart. Lorelei set down her flashlight and pried at one of the crates. The wood was soft with rot, coming apart easily under her hands. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected them for nearly 30 years, were gold bars, real gold, heavy and cold and worth a fortune. So it was true, all of it. The stories, the legends, the Ashford gold actually existed, and Vivian knew about it now. Lorelei let the gold bar slip from her fingers. What good was it? She couldn't carry it out, couldn't use it to buy her freedom. It was just dead weight in the darkness, another thing for Vivian to kill for. She was about to turn away when her flashlight beam caught something else. Another passage, smaller than the others, half hidden behind the crates. And next to it, carved into the stone, were words. Lorelei moved closer, brushing away decades of grime with her fingers. The letters were rough but readable. Exit to the old stable, 200 yards east. C.K.C. a 1931. Her grandfather's initials, C.A. Cornelius Ashford Sr. An exit, a way out. Hope flared in Lorelei's chest like a struck match. This was it. This was what she needed. If she could find that exit, she could escape tonight when Vivian brought her down here, could run while Vivian was distracted by the gold. Lorelei grabbed her flashlight and moved toward the small passage. It was barely 3 feet high, forcing her to crawl on her hands and knees. The floor was rough stone that bit into her palms. Water dripped from the ceiling, soaking through her clothes. The passage seemed to go on forever. Lorelei's flashlight flickered, the batteries failing. She slapped it against her palm and the light steadied. But for how much longer? Keep moving. Just keep moving. The passage began to slope upward. That was good. That meant she was getting closer to the surface, closer to freedom. And then, without warning, the tunnel ended. Not in an opening, not in another chamber. Just ended. A wall of earth and stone blocking the way completely. Collapsed. The exit tunnel had collapsed. Lorelei sat back on her heels, staring at the rubble. This couldn't be happening. There had to be another way. Had to be. She felt along the edges of the collapse, looking for gaps for any space large enough to squeeze through. But it was solid, completely blocked. Years of settling earth and groundwater seepage had brought down the ceiling, filling the passage with tons of rock and dirt. There was no way through. Lorelei wanted to scream, wanted to beat her fists against the stone until they bled. But what good would that do? She was trapped, still trapped. The walls were just a little farther away now, that was all. Her flashlight flickered again. This time it didn't recover. The light dimmed to a faint orange glow, then died completely. Darkness crashed down like a physical weight. Lorelei sat in the absolute black, fighting panic. She could find her way back. She had to. She just needed to follow the tunnel back to the chamber with the gold, then find the passage that led to the coal cellar, then climb back up the shaft. Simple. Just retrace her steps in complete darkness, in a maze of tunnels beneath a 100-year-old house. She started crawling backward, feeling her way with her hands. The stone was cold and wet under her palms. Water dripped on her head, ran down her neck. She tried to count the yards, tried to remember how far she had come, but in the darkness, all sense of distance vanished. Was this the right direction? Had she turned around without realizing it? Was she crawling deeper into the earth instead of back toward safety? Stop. Think. Lorelei forced herself to be still, to listen, to breathe, and that was when she heard it. A voice. Soft, distant, coming from somewhere ahead in the darkness. Child. Lorelei's blood turned to ice. Who was down here? How was that possible? She was alone. She had to be alone. Don't be afraid, child. The voice was old, female, warm as a lullaby. Who's there? Lorelei's voice came out as a whisper, trembling and small. A friend, Someone who's been waiting for you. Light bloomed in the darkness. Not flashlight light. Something softer, warmer, like candlelight, though there was no visible flame. And in that compassionate illumination, Lorelei saw her. An old woman sat in the tunnel ahead, where seconds before there had been nothing but empty darkness. She wore a dress from another era, 1940s maybe, based on the cut and the faded floral pattern. Her hair was white, pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was lined with age, but kind. So very kind. How did you— Lorelei couldn't finish the question, couldn't process what she was seeing. There's no need for fear, the old woman smiled. I know you're confused, but I promise you I'm here to help. This isn't real. You're not real. Lorelei pressed her palms to her temples. I'm hallucinating. The darkness, the fear, I'm losing my mind. You're not losing anything, sweet girl. You're finding something. The woman shifted, and the light moved with her. Come, sit with me a while. You're safe here. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Lorelei crawled forward. The tunnel widened as she moved, opening into a small hollow space where the ceiling was high enough to sit upright. The old woman sat against the wall, surrounded by that impossible, sourceless light. Who are you? Lorelei asked. My name is Constance Ashford. The old woman's smile deepened. I'm your grandmother, child, your father's mother. Lorelei stared. That's impossible. You died. Before I was born, my father told me. There was an accident in these tunnels, a collapse. They never found your body. All of that is true. Constance reached out and took Lorelei's hand. Her touch was real, warm, solid. I died here in 1942, 19 years ago. I came down looking for my husband, your grandfather, when part of the tunnel system collapsed. He survived. I didn't. Then you're— Lorelei couldn't say it. A ghost? A spirit? I suppose I am. Constance squeezed her hand gently. I never left these tunnels, Lorelei. Couldn't leave. My task wasn't finished. I had to stay, to watch over this place, to watch over my family. This is insane. But even as Lorelei said it, she knew it was true, knew it in her bones. This woman, this spirit, was real, was her grandmother, was something impossible and yet undeniable. I've been watching you, Constance said softly, watching what that woman has done to you, the cruelty, the pain, and I've been waiting for the right moment to help. Tears burned in Lorelei's eyes. Then help me, please. Tell me how to escape, how to save my father, how to stop her. I will, child. I will. But first, you need to understand something. Constance's expression grew serious. Vivian Blackwell is not what she seems. She's done this before, multiple times. She finds wealthy men, vulnerable men, and she destroys them. I know. Ida found evidence. 2 husbands before my father, both dead. 3 husbands, Constance corrected. The first one was never officially recorded. A man in Boston, back in 1952. Vivian was young then, just starting out. She made mistakes with that one, had to leave town in a hurry. But she learned, got better at it, more patient, more careful. How do you know all this? I see things, hear things. The dead have their ways. Constance's eyes held depths of sadness. I've watched her, listened to her when she thought she was alone. She talks to herself sometimes, down here in the darkness, rehearses her lies, plans her murders. She came down here 3 days ago looking for the gold. That's when she found your mother's journal. Lorelei felt sick. She's going to kill me tonight. Force me to show her where the gold is, then kill me and make it look like an accident. I know. Constance stood, and the light brightened. That's why I'm here, to help you survive, to help you fight back. How? I'm trapped. The house is locked. The exit tunnel collapsed. There's no way out. There's always a way out, child. You just have to know where to look. Constance moved to the tunnel wall and pressed her hand against it. The stone glowed briefly under her touch. This place is old, older than you know. These tunnels, some of them go back centuries, long before your grandfather mined coal, long before this house was built. She pressed harder, and with a grinding sound a section of the wall swung inward. A hidden door. Beyond it lay another passage, this one different from the others. The walls were smoother, older, cut with tools that predated modern mining equipment. The original settlers, Constance explained, they dug these tunnels during the French and Indian War, used them as hideouts, as emergency escapes. Your grandfather found them when he was excavating for coal. He mapped some of them, but not all. The system is vast, miles of passages running through these hills. She led Lorelei through the hidden door into the ancient tunnel. The ceiling was higher here, the walls more carefully constructed. They walked for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time had no meaning in the unchanging darkness. They passed through chambers carved from living rock, through passages that rose and fell and twisted back on themselves, through places where water had carved the stone into fantastic shapes. And always Constance's light led the way, steady and sure. Finally they entered a large cavern. It was different from the others, natural, not carved. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles. A pool of dark water reflected their light like a mirror. And in the center of the cavern, on a flat piece of stone, sat a metal box. "What is this place?" Lorelei asked. "A place I've been preparing for you." Constance moved to the box and opened it. Inside were supplies, canned food, bottles of water, candles and matches, a heavy wool blanket. Ooh, and something else, a leather portfolio tied with string. "I've been bringing things down here for months," Constance said, "since I first saw what Vivian was planning. Food, water, everything you'll need to survive down here for several days if necessary." "Several days?" The thought of spending days in these tunnels made Lorelei's stomach turn. "Why would I?" "Because tonight, when Vivian brings you down, you're going to disappear." Constance opened the portfolio. Inside were papers, old documents, photographs. "This is evidence. Everything you need to prove what Vivian has done, her real identity, records of her previous marriages, death certificates for her husbands, insurance claims, all of it." Lorelei stared at the documents. "Where did you get these?" "I've had a long time to gather them. The dead can go places the living can't, can see things that remain hidden." Constance tied the portfolio closed and handed it to Lorelei. "When Vivian brings you down tonight, you'll lead her on a chase through these tunnels. Let her think you're running scared. Bring her deep, far from the house, and then you'll disappear into these passages I've shown you. She'll search, but she won't find you. Can't find you. These ancient tunnels, she doesn't know they exist. And then, you wait. 3 days. Your father returns Sunday. When he comes home and finds both you and Vivian missing, he'll search. He'll call the police. They'll find Vivian wandering these tunnels, half mad with exhaustion and fear. And when they bring her out, you'll appear, you'll tell them everything, show them the evidence, and Vivian Blackwell will finally face justice." It was a plan, a dangerous, desperate plan, but it was more than Lorelei had before. "What if something goes wrong?" Lorelei asked. "What if she catches me? What if—" "I'll be with you." Constance took Lorelei's face in both hands. Her touch was warm, solid, real. "Every step of the way. You're not alone, child. You'll never be alone again. The blood of the Ashfords flows in your veins. We're survivors, we're fighters, and we protect our own." Lorelei felt something shift inside her. The frightened girl who had cowered under Vivian's abuse was still there, but something else was growing alongside her, something forged in darkness and desperation, something that had her grandmother's strength running through it like steel through stone. "Show me the way," she said. "Show me how to survive this." Constance smiled. And for the next hours, time had no meaning in the unchanging dark, she taught Lorelei the secrets of the tunnels, the hidden passages, the landmarks only someone who had walked these paths for nearly 2 decades would know, the places where water could be found, the chambers where air flowed fresh from the surface above. She showed Lorelei the ancient symbols carved into the walls by those first settlers. Arrows and crosses that marked the ways in and out, numbers that indicated distance, warnings about dangerous passages where the ceiling was unstable or the floor dropped away into nothing. And she showed her the special places, the caverns where crystals grew from the walls, catching light and multiplying it, the underground streams that sang as they flowed through channels of stone, the chambers where bats hung in clusters from the ceiling, living reminders that there were ways in and out if you knew where to look. By the time Constance led her back to the coal cellar, Lorelei had been transformed. She knew these tunnels now, not all of them. That would take a lifetime, but enough. Enough to survive, enough to disappear. "One more thing," Constance said, as they stood at the base of the coal chute. Above, daylight showed through the open grate. "Tonight Vivian will bring someone with her, her accomplice, a man named Graves. He's the one who does the heavy work, who makes the accidents look real." Lorelei's blood went cold. "How do I fight two of them?" "You don't fight. You run. You lead them into the deep tunnels, the old ones where the passages split and multiply. You separate them, and then you vanish." Constance pressed something into Lorelei's hand, a small silver locket. "This was mine. Your grandfather gave it to me on our wedding day. Keep it. When you're afraid, when you think you can't go on, hold it. Remember who you are. Remember what runs in your blood." Lorelei opened the locket. Inside were two tiny photographs, a young Constance and a handsome man she recognized from old family pictures. Her grandfather, both of them smiling, young, alive with hope. "Thank you," Lorelei whispered. "Climb up now. Go back to the house. Act normal. Wait for tonight. And when it comes..." Constance's form began to fade, the light dimming. "Be the storm, child. Be the fury and the fear and the reckoning all at once. Make her regret the day she ever heard the name Ashford." And then she was gone, the light extinguished. Lorelei stood alone in the darkness, clutching the locket and the portfolio of evidence. She began to climb. The daylight above was blinding after so long underground. Lorelei pulled herself out of the coal chute, blinking against the brightness. The sun was high overhead. It was early afternoon. She had been down there for 7 hours, though it had felt like mere minutes in the timeless dark below. She replaced the grate, covered it with ivy, and made her way back to the house. Her clothes were filthy, covered in anthracite residue and mud. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, but her eyes held something new, something hard and bright and dangerous. Ida found her at the back door. The housekeeper's eyes widened in shock. "Miss Lorelei, where have you been? What happened to you?" "I need to clean up," Lorelei said calmly, "before Vivian sees me. Can you help?" Ida asked no questions. She smuggled Lorelei up the servants' stairs to her room and helped her wash. The water in the basin turned black with dirt and dust. Lorelei changed into clean clothes and hid the portfolio under her mattress. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Ida asked finally. "Tonight," Lorelei said. "Tonight everything ends, one way or another." Ida looked like she wanted to argue, wanted to press for answers. But something in Lorelei's expression stopped her. This wasn't the frightened girl she had comforted for months. This was someone else, someone harder, someone capable of surviving what was coming. "Be careful," was all Ida said. "Please, child, be careful." Lorelei spent the rest of the afternoon in her room, memorizing the maps in her mind, the tunnels, the passages, the escape routes. She held her grandmother's locket and felt the weight of all the Ashford women who had come before her, strong women, survivors, women who had faced darkness and emerged into light. Sunset painted the sky blood red. Night fell like a curtain, and somewhere in the house below, Vivian Blackwell prepared for murder. The knock came at 9 o'clock. Lorelei sat on her bed, already dressed in dark clothes and sturdy boots. She had spent the last hour in meditation, steadying her breathing, preparing her mind. The locket hung around her neck, hidden beneath her collar. Its weight was a comfort, a reminder of who she was and what she carried in her blood. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. The door opened. Vivian stood in the hallway, elegant as always in a tailored wool coat, but something was different tonight. The mask had slipped. The cold calculation in her eyes was naked now, undisguised. "It's time," Vivian said. "Get up." Lorelei stood slowly. "Where are we going?" "You know exactly where." Vivian stepped aside, revealing the man behind her. He was large, thick-shouldered, with hands like sledgehammers and a face that had seen too many fights. His eyes were flat, dead. The eyes of someone who had done terrible things and would do them again without hesitation. "This is Mr. Graves," Vivian said. "He's going to ensure our little expedition goes smoothly. No running, no screaming, just a nice, quiet walk down to the coal cellar and through the tunnels to show me what your grandfather hid. Do you understand?" Lorelei nodded, played the frightened girl one last time. "I understand." "Good." Vivian's smile was arctic. "Lead the way." They walked through the silent house, down the main stairs, through the kitchen. Ida was nowhere to be seen. Lorelei felt a flash of worry but pushed it down. Focus. Stay focused. The cellar door stood open. Stone steps descended into darkness. Vivian produced a flashlight and handed it to Lorelei. "After you," she said. "And remember, Mr. Graves will be right behind you. One wrong move and, well..." She didn't finish the threat. Didn't need to. Lorelei took the flashlight and began to descend. The cellar was exactly as she remembered from that morning. Cold, damp, smelling of earth and old stone. Her flashlight beam swept across the rough walls, the low ceiling, the opening to the coal tunnels beyond. "Keep moving," Vivian ordered from behind her. Lorelei entered the tunnel. She could hear Graves breathing behind her, heavy and mechanical. Could hear Vivian's lighter footsteps, the click of her heels muffled by the dirt floor. The tunnel twisted and turned. Lorelei moved with confidence now, no longer the lost girl fumbling in darkness. She knew these passages, had walked them with her grandmother's ghost, every turn, every branch, every landmark. She led them deeper, away from the house, away from safety. "How much farther?" Vivian's voice echoed off the stone walls. "Not far," Lorelei called back. "The chamber is just ahead." That was a lie. The chamber with the gold was in the opposite direction. But Vivian didn't know that, couldn't know that. She had only seen the maps in the journal, and those maps were incomplete, deliberately incomplete. Her grandfather had been too smart to document everything. The tunnel opened into a natural cavern, not the one where Constance had left supplies, but a similar space, large enough for all of them to stand upright, multiple passages branching off in different directions. "Well?" Vivian swept her own flashlight around the space. "Where is it?" I'm not sure," Lorelei said, injecting uncertainty into her voice. "It all looks the same down here. I think maybe that passage?" She pointed to the leftmost tunnel. "You think?" Vivian's voice turned sharp. "You better be more certain than that, girl." "I'm trying. It's dark and confusing and—" "Graves," Vivian interrupted. "Encourage her to remember." The big man moved forward. His hand shot out and grabbed Lorelei's arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. She cried out, genuine pain mixing with feigned terror. "The gold," Graves said. His voice was like gravel being crushed. "Where?" "I don't know. I swear I don't." Lorelei struggled against his grip. "Please, you're hurting me." "That's the idea." He twisted her arm, and Lorelei screamed. The scream echoed through the cavern, through the tunnels, through the ancient passages cut by settlers 2 centuries ago, and something answered. A sound like wind, though there was no wind down here. A whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The temperature dropped suddenly, visibly. Their breath plumed in the flashlight beams. "What the hell?" Graves released Lorelei and spun around, his flashlight sweeping the darkness. The whisper grew louder, formed into words, old words in a voice that carried the weight of years. "Leave this place. Leave my blood alone." Vivian's face had gone white. "Who's there? Show yourself." A light bloomed in one of the side passages. That soft, sourceless glow that Lorelei recognized. Constance. Her grandmother had come, and she was not alone. More lights appeared, dozens of them, flickering in passages all around the cavern. Figures moved in that ghostly illumination. Men in miners' clothes from a century ago, women in dresses from the 1800s, children who had died young in the dark places beneath the earth. The dead of Morrison Ridge had come to witness. "This is a trick," Vivian snarled, but her voice shook. "Some kind of trick. Graves, grab her!" Graves lunged for Lorelei, but she was already moving, darting toward the passage where Constance's light shone brightest. The passage she knew, the one that led deep into the ancient tunnel system. "Stop her!" Vivian screamed. Lorelei ran. Behind her, chaos erupted. Graves charged after her, but in his panic he chose the wrong passage. She could hear him crashing through the darkness, cursing as he hit his head on the low ceiling. Could hear Vivian shouting orders, her voice edged with hysteria. Lorelei ran on, sure-footed in the darkness. She knew these paths, had walked them in her mind 100 times since this morning. Every turn, every branch, every step. The passage narrowed, dropped. She had to crouch, then crawl. Behind her she could hear Graves struggling to follow, his bulk making it impossible to move quickly through the tight space. The passage opened into another chamber. Lorelei burst through and immediately turned right into a tunnel so narrow she had to turn sideways to fit through. Graves would never make it. He was too big. She could hear him raging behind her, stuck in the narrow opening, hear Vivian's voice growing more distant, calling out, searching for another route. Good. Let them separate. Let them panic. Lorelei emerged in a long, straight tunnel. She ran, her flashlight beam bouncing ahead of her. The tunnel split into 3 branches. She took the middle one. It curved back on itself, descended sharply, then opened into a vast underground chamber. This was the place Constance had shown her. The cavern with the still pool of water. The supplies hidden on the stone platform. Her sanctuary. But she didn't stop here, not yet. She could still hear Vivian somewhere in the tunnels behind her, still searching, still hunting. Lorelei needed to lead her deeper, into the oldest passages. The dangerous ones where the ceiling was unstable and the floor dropped away without warning, where even with a flashlight you could get turned around and lost forever. She crossed the cavern and entered another passage on the far side. This one sloped upward at a sharp angle. Her legs burned as she climbed. The air grew colder, thinner. They were going higher now, up into the heart of the ridge. The passage ended at a junction. 5 tunnels, each identical, branching off like the fingers of a hand. Lorelei had memorized which one led where. But to someone who didn't know, who was panicked and exhausted and terrified, they would be lost. She heard footsteps behind her, running, getting closer. Vivian! Lorelei ducked into the second tunnel from the right, moved 20 feet in, then stopped, killed her flashlight, pressed herself against the wall and waited in perfect darkness. The footsteps reached the junction, stopped. "Lorelei!" Vivian's voice was ragged now, stripped of its usual polish. "I know you're here. Come out!" Silence. "You can't hide forever. These tunnels have to end somewhere. And when I find you—" The threat hung unfinished in the air. Vivian's flashlight beam swept across the junction, illuminating each passage entrance in turn. Lorelei held her breath, making herself as small as possible. The light moved away. Vivian was choosing a different tunnel, the wrong tunnel. Lorelei waited until the footsteps faded, until silence returned. Then she clicked her flashlight back on and moved quickly through the passages she knew would take her back to the cavern with the supplies. She found it easily. The pool of water reflected her light like black glass. The supplies were exactly where Constance had left them. Food, water, blankets, everything she needed. Lorelei sat down on the stone platform and allowed herself a moment to breathe, to think, to process what had just happened. She had done it. She had led them into the maze, separated them. Now all she had to do was wait. Wait for them to exhaust themselves searching. Wait for panic to set in. Wait for the darkness and the silence to break them. 3 days. That's what Constance had said. 3 days, and her father would return. 3 days, and the police would come. She could survive 3 days down here. She had food, water, light. Knowledge of these tunnels that her pursuers didn't have. She could survive. But first, she needed to make sure they couldn't find her. Lorelei stood and walked to the pool's edge. She could see herself reflected in the dark water, but there was another reflection there too, standing beside her. Constance. "You did well, child," the ghost said softly. "You were brave. They're still out there, searching. They'll search for a while longer. Then the fear will take them. The darkness, the cold, the hunger. These tunnels have a way of breaking people who don't belong here." Constance knelt beside the pool and touched the water with one ghostly hand. Ripples spread outward. By tomorrow they'll be desperate. By the day after they'll be mad with it. And then they'll stumble out into the light, and your father will be waiting. "What about Graves? He's dangerous." "He's already lost." Constance pointed to the water. The ripples formed an image, hazy but visible. A tunnel. And in that tunnel, Graves, stumbling through the darkness. His flashlight was dead. He was feeling his way along the walls, and every few seconds he would stop and scream into the darkness, screaming for Vivian, for anyone. But no one answered. "He took the wrong turn at the fork," Constance said, "went down instead of up. He's in the deep passages now, the ones that flood when the spring rains come. He won't find his way out." Lorelei should have felt satisfaction, should have felt justice, but all she felt was a cold, hollow victory. Will he die down here? That's not for me to say. The living have choices, the dead do not. Constance's reflection smiled sadly. But I don't think he's a man who will choose well. The image in the water faded. Lorelei sat down again, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was leaving her system, and in its wake came the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been running on fear and determination for too long. "Rest now," Constance said. "I'll watch over you. Nothing will harm you here. This place is sanctuary, has been for 200 years. Lorelei lay down on the stone platform, wrapped in the wool blanket. The stone was hard and cold, but she was beyond caring. Her eyes drifted shut. She dreamed of sunlight, of her mother's garden in full bloom, of a time before Vivian, when the house on Morrison Ridge had been a place of warmth and safety and love. Time lost all meaning in the tunnels. Lorelei slept and woke in cycles, measuring hours by the candles she lit. Each one burned for approximately 4 hours. She had 12 candles, 48 hours, 2 full days. Constance came and went, appearing and disappearing like thought itself. She told Lorelei stories about the tunnels, about the people who had hidden here during the wars, about miners who had found unexpected beauty in the deep dark places of the earth, about the interconnectedness of all things, living and dead, above and below. "These tunnels are older than you know," Constance said during one of her visits. "Older than the house, older than the mines. The earth made them over millions of years as water carved through limestone and slate. We only found them, used them. But they've always been here, and they'll be here long after we're all dust." On what Lorelei estimated was Sunday, February 26th, day 2 in the tunnels, she heard voices in the distant passages. Vivian, still searching, still hunting. But the voice was different now, hoarse, desperate. Sometimes it called Lorelei's name. Sometimes it called for Graves. Sometimes it simply screamed, wordless rage and fear echoing through the stone passages. "She's breaking," Constance observed. "The darkness does that, strips away all the masks we wear, shows us what we really are underneath. What if she finds me? She won't. These caverns, the ancient ones, they protect those who respect them. Your grandfather knew that. That's why he hid his gold here. That's why I stayed here after I died. We're part of these tunnels now. And so are you." Night of the second day, Though there was no real day or night down here, only the slow burning of candles, Lorelei ate her last can of food, drank her last bottle of water. Tomorrow her father would return. Tomorrow the police would come. Tomorrow she would climb back up to the light. She spent that last night awake thinking about everything that had happened, about who she had been before Vivian came, about who she was now, about the girl who had cowered under abuse and the young woman who had learned to fight back. Strength, she realized, wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. At what her best guess told her was morning of Sunday, February 26th, Lorelei gathered her things. The portfolio of evidence, the locket, the empty cans and bottles. She wouldn't leave trash in these sacred spaces. "It's time," she said to the darkness, and Constance appeared beside her. "Your father arrived home 2 hours ago," the ghost said. "He found the house empty, found Ida locked in the pantry. Vivian's work, obviously." She told him everything. "He's called the police. They're organizing search parties even now." "And Vivian?" Constance's expression turned grim. "Still down here, still hunting. She's been down for nearly 70 hours now. No food, no water. Her flashlight died yesterday. She's been crawling through the tunnels in complete darkness, feeling her way along the walls, calling out to ghosts that don't answer." "Should I feel sorry for her? That's not for me to decide. Mercy and justice, those are choices for the living." Constance held out her hand. "Come, I'll lead you to where they'll find you, to where you can make your grand reappearance. And then, child, you'll tell your truth, show them your evidence, and watch as everything Vivian Blackwell built comes crashing down." They walked through the tunnels together, ghost and girl, moving through passages carved by water and time and human hands, through chambers that held the bones of the earth, through places where crystals grew like frozen starlight. They climbed steadily upward. Lorelei could feel it now, the change in air pressure, the slight warmth that meant they were approaching the surface, the distant sound of voices calling her name. Finally, they reached a passage that Lorelei recognized, the main coal tunnel, the one that led directly to the cellar beneath the house. "This is where I leave you," Constance said. "This is as far as I can go. Will I see you again? Perhaps, perhaps not. The dead don't always get to choose." Constance reached out and touched Lorelei's cheek. Her hand was warm, solid, real. "But I'll always be here, in these tunnels, in this ridge, in the blood that runs through your veins. You're an Ashford child. We don't break. We don't quit. We survive." "Thank you," Lorelei whispered, "for everything. Thank your grandfather. He's the one who taught me to be strong, who showed me that love doesn't end just because life does." Constance smiled. "Now go back to the light. Tell your story. Live your life, and remember, you're never alone. Never." She faded like morning mist, like a dream upon waking, like every beautiful, impossible thing that exists for just a moment before disappearing into memory. Lorelei stood alone in the tunnel. She could hear the voices more clearly now. Her father's voice, Ida's voice, police officers calling her name, their shouts echoing through the stone passages. She took a deep breath, touched the locket at her throat one last time. Then she stepped into the main tunnel and called out, "I'm here! I'm here!" The voices stopped, then erupted in excitement. "She's alive! We found her!" Flashlight beams converged on her position. People came running. Her father reached her first, sweeping her into his arms with a strength she didn't know he still possessed. "Lorelei! Oh God, Lorelei!" He was crying. She had never seen her father cry. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought—" "I'm okay, Papa," she said, and realized it was true. She was okay, battered and exhausted and forever changed, but okay. "I'm okay now." Police officers surrounded them. Paramedics appeared with blankets and water. Someone wrapped her in warmth and guided her toward the stairs, toward daylight, toward the world she had left behind 3 days ago. They brought her up into the kitchen. The house had never looked so beautiful. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It was 8:47 a.m. on Sunday, February 26, 1961. Ida was there, crying and laughing at the same time, pulling Lorelei into a fierce hug. "You clever, brave, wonderful child," Ida sobbed. "You survived! You survived!" Ida had spent the last 3 days locked in the pantry, surviving on preserved vegetables and water from the old pipes. Vivian had told Cornelius that Ida had quit and left. He had believed her, of course. He always believed her. Cornelius Ashford stood nearby, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago, but his eyes were clearer now. The fog that had settled over him during Vivian's reign had lifted. "Lorelei," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me everything. The truth. All of it." So she did, with police officers taking notes and recording her words. Lorelei told them everything, about the abuse, the poisoning, the plan to murder her in the tunnels, about Ida's discoveries and her mother's warnings, about being forced into the tunnels at gunpoint. And then she handed them the portfolio. "My grandmother gave this to me," she said simply. "In the tunnels. She's been gathering evidence for months." The police officers exchanged glances. One of them opened the portfolio carefully. Inside were documents that shouldn't exist: birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, insurance claims, newspaper clippings from 3 different cities detailing the suspicious deaths of wealthy men whose widows had inherited everything. "How did you get these?" one officer asked. "Does it matter?" Cornelius said sharply. "Look at what they prove. That woman, she's a serial killer. She's been doing this for years. And she almost—" He couldn't finish, couldn't say the words. Before they could continue, another officer burst into the kitchen. "We need Detective Harris here immediately. We have new information." A man in a dark suit entered, Detective Harris from Philadelphia. He carried a thick folder. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "I've been investigating Vivian Blackwell for the past 6 months. We received an anonymous tip about suspicious deaths connected to her. What we've found is," he opened the folder, "she's not responsible for 3 murders. She's responsible for 4. The room went silent. The first victim was in 1952, but there was another. A man named Thomas Ashford, a lawyer in Philadelphia. He died in 1955 under suspicious circumstances. Vivian was his wife for 6 months before his death." Cornelius staggered. "Thomas Ashford? But that was my cousin. My father's nephew." "Exactly," Detective Harris said. "Vivian didn't randomly target you, Mr. Ashford. She's been hunting your family for 6 years. Thomas rejected a loan request from Vivian's mother back in 1949 when the family was destitute. Vivian's mother died in poverty, and Vivian decided the entire Ashford family owed her a debt. This was the 7th twist, not random predation, calculated revenge. Vivian had researched the Ashford family, learned about the coal tunnels and the hidden gold, and systematically targeted them. She had married Thomas first, killed him, and inherited his estate. Then she had set her sights on Cornelius, the wealthier, more vulnerable target. "Oh my God," Cornelius whispered. "This was all planned, from the very beginning." "We believe so," Harris said, "and we need to verify these documents, but if they're authentic," he looked at his team, "we need to find Vivian Blackwell, now." "She's still down there," Lorelei said, "in the tunnels, lost. She's been down there for 3 days. No food, no water, no light." "We'll organize search teams," another officer said. "These tunnels, do you know them well enough to guide us?" Lorelei thought of Constance, of the ancient passages, of the deep places where secrets lived. "I know them," she said, "but I don't think you'll need a guide. If you go down and call out, she'll come to the sound of voices. She'll be desperate by now, more than ready to be found." They were organizing the search when someone shouted from the cellar stairs, "We've got something! Movement in the tunnels!" Everyone rushed to the cellar. Lorelei followed, her heart pounding. Was it Vivian, or had they found graves? A figure stumbled out of the coal tunnel into the cellar. It was barely recognizable as human, filthy, wild-eyed, clothing torn to rags, hair matted with dirt and blood from where she had crawled through narrow passages in the dark. Vivian Blackwell collapsed on the cellar floor. She looked up at the circle of people surrounding her. Her eyes found Lorelei, and in those eyes, Lorelei saw complete madness. "You," Vivian croaked. Her voice was barely human. "You did this. You left me down there, in the dark, with the voices, the lights, the ghosts. They wouldn't stop whispering, wouldn't stop watching. Your grandmother, your mother, all of them, judging me, condemning me." "Ma'am, you need medical attention," a paramedic said, trying to approach her. "Stay away." Vivian scrambled backward, her back hitting the wall. "You're all part of it, all part of the conspiracy, the house, the tunnels, the dead. They're all working together, planning, plotting." "Mrs. Blackwell," Detective Harris said carefully, "we need you to come with us. We need to ask you some questions about—" "I didn't kill them," Vivian shrieked. The words echoed off the stone walls. "They deserved it, all of them, taking and never giving back. The world owed me. I was just collecting what was mine." The cellar went silent. Every police officer had frozen, hands moving toward notebooks to write down this impromptu confession. "Mrs. Blackwell," Harris said carefully, "are you saying you killed your previous husbands?" "Previous? Previous?" Vivian started laughing. It was a sound that made Lorelei's skin crawl. "There's no such thing as previous. There's only the pattern. Find them, seduce them, marry them. Wait, be patient. Let the poison do its work slowly. So slowly, no one suspects." And then she made a gesture like wiping a slate clean. "Gone. And everything they had becomes mine." "And Cornelius Ashford?" another officer asked. "Were you poisoning him too?" Vivian's mad eyes found Cornelius. "You were supposed to die," she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. 6 months. That's usually all it takes. But you're stronger than the others, stubborn. Wouldn't die fast enough, so I had to improvise. Had to deal with the girl first. She was getting suspicious. That nosy old housekeeper was poking around. I had to accelerate the timeline. "And Mr. Graves?" someone asked. "Where is he?" "Graves?" Vivian's laughter turned hysterical. "He's still down there, still searching. I haven't heard his voice in 2 days. The tunnels took him, swallowed him whole, just like they tried to swallow me. But I'm smarter. I found my way out. I always find a way out." She kept talking, kept confessing, words spilling out in a toxic stream, about her childhood, about her first husband, about how easy it was to kill someone if you were patient enough, how simple to forge documents, to lie to doctors, to play the grieving widow while planning your next conquest, about Thomas Ashford rejecting her mother's pleas for help, about how she had sworn revenge on the entire family. 2 officers moved forward to take her into custody. Vivian didn't resist. She just kept talking, still confessing. The madness had broken something fundamental in her mind. 72 hours in complete darkness, lost in a maze of ancient tunnels with nothing but her own guilt and the whispers of the dead, had shattered her completely. They led her up the stairs, still talking, still confessing. Lorelei watched her go and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty relief that it was over. "We'll need full statements from everyone," Detective Harris said. "And we'll need to organize a search for this Graves individual. But based on what we've heard and what we're seeing in these documents," he looked at Cornelius, "Sir, I think it's safe to say Vivian Crane, that's her real name, will be facing multiple murder charges. She's going to prison for the rest of her life." Cornelius nodded slowly. He looked broken, aged, but also clearer-eyed than Lorelei had seen him in months. "I was a fool," he said quietly. "I was grieving and lonely, and I let her in. Let her poison more than just my body. She poisoned my judgment, made me doubt my own daughter." He turned to Lorelei, tears streaming down his face. "Can you ever forgive me?" Lorelei looked at her father, this man who had failed her, who had chosen a beautiful lie over an ugly truth, who had been too weak to see what was happening in his own house, but he was still her father. And he was trying, finally trying. "Yes," she said simply, "I forgive you." He pulled her into his arms again and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Maybe she was. Over his shoulder, Lorelei saw Ida wiping tears from her eyes, saw the police officers talking in low voices, saw sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, warm and golden and real. She was free. Finally. Impossibly free. 2 months later, in late April of 1961, spring came to Morrison Ridge. The trial had been brief. Vivian Crane, whose real name turned out to be Vivian Mortimer, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, and 1 count of attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Her confession, recorded in the Ashford cellar, was damning. The documents Constance had gathered proved her previous crimes. She was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. The psychiatric evaluation determined she was legally sane, but had suffered a complete psychotic break in the tunnels. She spent her days in a maximum security prison, occasionally muttering about ghosts and judgment and debts owed to the dead. They never found Graves' body in the tunnels. Search teams had explored the passages for weeks, mapping routes that had been forgotten for generations. But the deep tunnels, the ones that flooded in spring when the rains came, those remained impassable. 6 months later, when the water finally receded in early August, they found his remains in one of the lowest passages. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning. They buried him in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery. Nobody claimed the body. Nobody mourned him. But that was later. In April, life was returning to Morrison Ridge. Lorelei stood now in her mother's old flower beds, working soil that had gone fallow for too long. Ida worked beside her, planting rose bushes and lavender and chrysanthemums. They worked in comfortable silence, hands in the earth, faces turned toward the sun. Cornelius was different now. Sober in ways that had nothing to do with alcohol. The arsenic had been flushed from his system through months of treatment. He had quit his business trips, had turned over day-to-day operations of the lumber company to his managers. He spent his time at home, rebuilding the relationship with his daughter, trying to become the father he should have been all along. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds took longer to heal. The nightmares still came sometimes, for both of them. But they were trying. That was something. The house felt different too, lighter, as if Vivian's darkness had lifted with her departure. Rooms that had been oppressive were simply rooms again. Spaces where terrible things had happened were being reclaimed, repainted, reimagined. "How does it look?" Ida asked, stepping back to survey their work. "Beautiful," Lorelei said. And it was. The garden was coming back to life. Green shoots pushing through dark earth, buds preparing to bloom, life insisting on itself despite everything. "Your mother would be proud," Ida said softly. "I hope so." Lorelei had returned to school in March. The stares and whispers lasted about 2 weeks before something else caught everyone's attention, and she became just another student again. Her old friends had welcomed her back cautiously at first, then warmly when they realized she was still the same person underneath all the trauma. She had started keeping a journal, not about the horrors she'd survived, but about the future she was building. She wrote about her plans to study law at the University of Pennsylvania, about the foundation she wanted to create for children trapped in abusive homes, about using her story to help others find their own strength. The gold, her grandfather's Depression-era fortune, remained in the tunnels. Cornelius had decided to leave it there. "It brought nothing but death and greed," he said. "Let it stay buried. We have enough." He was right. The lumber business was thriving. They didn't need cursed gold. The tunnels themselves had been partially sealed. Not all the entrances. Cornelius understood their historical significance. The state had sent inspectors who mapped the safe passages and created a small historical site. But the dangerous passages, the deep shafts where Graves had died, those were collapsed and filled with concrete. No one else would get lost in that underground labyrinth. They worked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. When they finally went inside, tired and dirty and satisfied, Cornelius had dinner waiting. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and vegetables from the garden, but made with care and served with love. After dinner, Lorelei went to her room. She stood at the window, looking out at the hills that rolled away into the distance. Somewhere beneath those hills were the tunnels, the ancient passages, the places where she had faced her fears and found her strength. She touched the locket at her throat, opened it, looked at the faces of her grandparents, young and happy and in love. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, "for everything." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she felt a warm presence beside her. Thought she saw a reflection in the window glass that wasn't quite her own. A smile, a gentle touch on her shoulder, a whisper that might have been the wind or might have been something more. "You're welcome, child. Now live. Live for all of us." And then it was gone. Lorelei was alone again, but not lonely. Never lonely, because she carried them with her now. Her mother, her grandmother, all the strong women who had come before her and would come after. Their strength was her strength. Their love was her foundation. She closed the locket and turned from the window. On the 1-year anniversary of her mother's death, August 15th, 1961, Lorelei and Cornelius would visit Catherine's grave. They would bring roses from the garden, the same roses Catherine had planted years ago, and that Lorelei had brought back to life. And Cornelius would say quietly, "She would be proud of you." And Lorelei would reply, "She would be proud of both of us for surviving, for healing, for becoming better than our worst moments." But that was still months away. Tonight, Lorelei had homework. She had friends to call. She had a normal teenage life to live. Tomorrow she would return to school, would see her friends again, would continue building a normal life. There would be challenges, questions, stares, and whispers from people who knew her story, but she would face them, would stand tall and strong and unashamed. Because she was Lorelei Ashford, daughter of survivors, heir to strength, a girl who had descended into darkness and climbed back toward the light. And nothing would ever break her again. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. Stars emerged one by one, ancient and eternal. The house settled into comfortable silence. The tunnels beneath the earth held their secrets close. And in the garden, where life was returning after long winter, the first roses began to bloom. The Ashford curse was broken. The nightmare was over. And in its place, slowly but surely, hope took root and began to grow.